Our next session is called Financing the Internet for All. Track chair is John Ryan. Our panelists for this session are Holly Ruxin, CEO of Montcalm, Katerina Rindi, blockchain consultant and director of corporate social responsibility for Elephant, and John Ryan, organizer of People-Centered Internet. Thank you, guys.
Hi, yeah, I'm John Ryan. I'm going to say a few quick remarks and then introduce Holly and Katerina. Thanks. The first thing to say is a number, which is $100 billion, which is about how much it will cost to get the nearly 4 billion people who are not connected to the internet connected and using it. And of course, that nearly 4 billion people are the poorest part of the world. So this brings us to a really interesting challenge, right? Whenever you go out shopping, you go to you look at people at the gas station, you know that they have an internet account, they're paying Comcast some ridiculous amount of money, and that they have a Gmail account that they get for free. And Google provides that nice Gmail account for free on the condition that they can sort of rifle through your files and see whether they can sell you shoes, nice boots, or whatever it is that they think they can put information they can sell to advertisers. So today we have a commerce-centered internet. Okay, there's not a problem with that. I pay my bill, you pay your bill. Now we get to the 4 billion people for whom disposable income is an aspiration, and that for at least half of them, shoes are an aspiration. And the idea of just extending the internet, and I use the expression business model very, very loosely, the way we pay for stuff today on the internet, the idea of extending that to those billions doesn't seem to quite work. And so one of the things that I'm trying to do with the People-Centered Internet Project is to make sure that when we bring those 4 billion people online, it's creating value for them. And I don't just mean value in some social benefit kind of way. I actually mean a financial benefit. Some banker is smiling because he got the return he wanted. The instrument was better off. The village is financially better off. The community is better off. And that there is, in fact, a path for paying off the $100 billion it's going to take to connect everybody. So that we can go into the project of connecting everybody, not just believing that the internet is the most powerful tool we have for empowering mankind, but actually knowing it. So those are sort of my opening remarks. I come to the People-Centered Internet Project with a background in sort of mathematics and stuff, and did corporate strategy for a bunch of high-tech companies, always being really careful to make sure that the strategy foots to the reality of what was on the ground, of the economics of the proposed users, and the actual physics. And so you can hear in this my concern that the assertion that we can take the internet to the next 4 billion doesn't foot unless we know how to make sure that the other 4 billion people are really being affected in ways that are economically positive. And now here with me, we also have two brilliant women, Holly Ruxin, and Katerina Rindi, who are going to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their perspectives.
Hello, hello. So my name is Katerina Rindi, and I have a background in education and nonprofits. I have come to tech sort of as a self-taught route, and have recently become immersed in the Bitcoin and blockchain world. But I've tracked all the way through with my education and nonprofit values. And so I'm really interested in thinking about how we build these next tools, blockchain, for example, in a way that takes into consideration these billions of unbanked people, completely disenfranchised communities, and make them a part of our systems, make them a part of the shared resources all the way around the world. And so that's sort of where I'm coming at it from.
Hi, my name is Holly Ruxin. My background has been pretty much in Wall Street products since I was very young, starting with currency warrants in London and experience in the futures market, and then fixed income derivatives at some of the big Wall Street firms in New York. Really fascinated with how capital markets was created that actually created value. When you have a futures market where you have a corn farmer in our modern times in the US that needs $60 a bushel to pay for his rent and for his family, and we devised a way to create a contract to hand it to him and say, or her, and say, we'll give you $60 a bushel on June 1st, that actually, to me, I think is a really amazing is really amazing way to create a flow of resources where everyone benefits. And I think in the last 25, 30 years, Wall Street's taken a lot of those great ideas and derivatives, and even the derivatives market created to support Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac so that we can create housing for people in this country. But they took all those products and they figured out how to ways to make money for themselves. The nature of the C Corp, needing to make money for the shareholders. So you created this system that was very much about scarcity, about taking. And so my take is, how do we actually shift that with the pipes we have for capital markets? $100 billion is 10 basis points of $100 trillion. $100 trillion is what's currently in the global equity markets. That's 0.1% of the current funds out there. That actually isn't really a lot of money. And it's amazing because that's actually for 4 billion people. So there's got to be a way that we can connect the two. There is a way. There absolutely is a way. To me, having talked to these guys, it has a lot to do with payments and blockchain. So we can kind of, for me to unpack a little bit more of this is my take on this.
Yeah, $100 billion. I always love hearing that's not a lot of money. But what's interesting is that when one reads about the ways that people are pushing to connect, people in Haiti or Democratic Republic of Congo, it's based on the least scalable instrument we know, which is philanthropy, right? People are trying to do it as though it were, I'll give and you give, and we'll see what we can do, and that will exhaust. And the next way that people try is with development finance, which is government to government. It has, compared to the public markets, limited access to funding. It's, I think, the gentle way of saying it, inefficient, right? A lot of it goes to outright corruption, and typically aid is intended to support the economy of the country giving the money, as opposed to the economy of the country receiving the good or service. So those are the two ways. How do we even get to a point where the people who actually have money, the public markets, the investment funds, the pension funds, can see that the other 4 billion, bringing them online, can create a way to, well, they're bankers. They do this because it's going to move money. How do we get there?
We don't.
Okay.
I think we go around. I do think we, to some extent, go around that. I think if we're waiting to get the pension funds and the mutual funds to buy into this, I think that's going to be a harder sell, so to speak, because we have to bring down the entire system that's holding it all up, and that's just too difficult. I think you start creating something new that people start naturally flowing to, is where crowdfunding and where this payments comes through, where you just start creating some sort of investment vehicles that are creating value for the end user. And you have all these different ways of putting that out there. We no longer actually, and from my perspective, financial services in the last 50, 60, 70 years was created because that was the only way that everyone in this room could actually buy an investment and put it in their portfolio. Well, financial services companies have very much moved away from being financial services companies, and they're very much just trying to make money for themselves, which leaves a very wide open gap to just create ways of tapping into investments outside of them. So I think if we really just need to focus on the simplicity of how do we create the product, how do we create the cash flows. The product's actually pretty easy to create. If you look back at Wall Street as securitization, all they did was take receivables on cars and credit cards, and they created asset-backed securities. I mean, this is what Wall Street did. They just created things out of nothing. So we can continue to do that. I mean, they created real securities, and then they started trading them. So to me, the solution to this is let's just do the same thing, but we have to figure out what are the receivables, how do we receive them, how do we exchange value, and then we have products.
So just staying with that for a second, so one of the things that has enabled securitization is the creation of quite rigorous templates around documents. The collapse of the mortgage securities in 2008, 2009 was in large part because people went off script. They were lying, right? Lying, both the lenders and the borrowers both. Is it conceivable that we could use the data fields about not only the sort of loan recipients, but maybe the loan recipients on a small scale, to actually start securitizing instruments so that if you like, at the moment we lend money, let's say you go to Kiva and you can put $40 in and someone buys a sewing machine. But to do that only 3 or 4 orders of magnitude larger and make it securitizable, is that where you're going?
I mean, that's the model, and we're looking at lots of models like that, but you have to do that 100,000 times over. To then, if you're really going to start replicating what Wall Street's done in the last 50 years, it just has to be at scale, and that's where we come to you in blockchain is how can that start solving that problem by having those ledgers so that you can track it all and it's super safe and you can put tons together. Risk is not an issue because you could have 15% of the people not pay, or you can have risk, but you have to do it in scale and put it together.
Quantify in the theory of large numbers. If you know you're going to have 15% of the people default, then, well, you just bake that into your ROI calculations and move on.
Absolutely, it's a math problem, but like you said, the value system's in place and people are not lying. And you actually have people who are putting these products together who actually are trying to create value across the board. I think from my experience of 25 years on Wall Street, you've solved 90% of the problem by just trying to create something and then manifest some things that actually make sense and a value to the end user and are getting capital into the hands of the people who need it. But the mechanism of how we do it is where that's also a huge issue. It has to be something new. It has to be using blockchain. It has to be using ways of exchanging the value of funds that's not going through Bank of America.
Does it have to be using blockchain?
Well, I would say that the billions of people that you're talking about don't have access to banks at all. And so they're not even thinking about financial vehicles in any capacity. But they have inherent value as citizens within their local communities. And so when I think about how to monetize or come up with a business model, I think about what is it that the poorest person is still, that can still add. What is their contribution in a way? And I think it's looking at data. I think it's their behavior. I think it can be health information. We were talking about this earlier, and I gave an example that there's a pharmaceutical company that's developing a new drug for high blood pressure, and they want to have a very large sample from which to get information about people's diets or their genetic makeup. And I think this is a very simple bit of information that even the poorest person could contribute in a way. And when we think about Bitcoin and blockchains, we're not talking about financial vehicles. We're talking about people owning their own data and having some sovereignty of their information. And it can be behavioral information. It can be financial information. It can be health information. And using blockchains to have that information available to different organizations that want to use it, but being able to actually have some of the benefits, some of the payments, the micropayments come back to the individuals. So it's a whole different direction than what you're talking about, but it comes back to how do we fund these big projects for people that are not connected to bank and financial systems.
So when you talk about the kind of transactions here, I think of myself in a village in rural Indonesia in Sumatra, and there's a little woman and she's got a little shop and she sells stuff, and I buy stuff. I give her like a million Indonesian rupiah, which is like $1 or something, and she sells me the stuff. And all of her record system consists of little pieces of just writing on little scraps of paper. Is it economically viable for her to go from that to a blockchain economy?
Does she have a cell phone? I mean,
yeah, of course she does. I mean, she's not right. Yes.
That's how people are connecting. So it's cell phone, it's cell services, and that's how their information is uploadable.
Let me dig into my question a little bit more. One of the particular concerns I have about Bitcoin, which I understand is Bitcoin is not synonymous with blockchain, and people use the word blockchain and they actually mean a whole menu of technologies. One of the problems with Bitcoin particularly is the transaction cost, right? It is actually more expensive to manage a transaction in Bitcoin than in some small cash ledgers. It's perfect if you're moving $1 million. It may not be perfect if you're moving 5 cents. Is that true?
It's a current issue. So right now, the transaction costs are still minuscule compared to what banks are charging for wire transfers. And in fact, banks won't move small amounts of money because it's just not worth it for them to do that at all. The Bitcoin blockchain specifically is having challenges right now as it's growing on how to have more transactions and how to keep them manageable financially. So that's one thing that's under development. But there's many other blockchains. Ethereum blockchain is an example. And the cost, the immediate cost of these transactions is minor. It is negligible.
Give me a number for negligible.
Less than a cent. So I have family in Italy, and I just was testing a new an app, a service called Circle that will let me send dollars and they receive it in euros. And I was testing with them. We were using WhatsApp to communicate, and I sent $5 as a test. My brother received 4 euros instantaneously and then had access to it. And he had no fees on that. The conversion, I think, was 4.6, okay. 4.4, something like that.
Sounds like
yeah. Well, it's these blockchain networks.
But it would
basically
be super interesting for me as a capital markets person to understand how they're doing that currency conversion.
All right, I'll connect you with them.
Sounds like the transacting company's losing money.
That's a multi-trillion-dollar market also.
Not to mention remittance. The entire remittance market is being built on this right now. It's evolving into this. So, but to get back to your point, there's an environmental cost with the Bitcoin blockchain. Yes. Because of that. I'm not sure if you were referring that. Right. Bitcoin mining itself is very energy inefficient, and that is a problem. Yeah. And so these other blockchains that are being built are looking at different kinds of instead of proof of work, using proof of stake. So people are addressing that. This is a nascent technology. It's 8 years old approximately, and it doesn't have a traditional governance system. So the way things evolve and change is by many people having to agree on it. Over 75% of the miners have to agree on it, and then a change is implemented. So how it evolves and how it changes and how it improves is not, someone makes a decree and then it's changed. So that whole process is also new. So back to your point, the actual transactions don't cost very much in the immediate process of it happening. There's an environmental cost, and then there's a future.
There's an environmental cost for Bitcoin.
For the Bitcoin blockchain, yes.
But so, woman in kiosk in Warung in Indonesia, and she sells, I buy a coconut, right? And she's bought the coconut, a box of coconuts or a case of coconuts from somebody else, right? Are those the kind of transactions that you see as being ones that we could move to a digital environment using things like Ethereum in the near future?
I think so. I think right now they're not, because like you said, they're being tracked on scraps of paper or people's memory, but you scale that up a few times, or her business grows, and then she's going to have to write it down. Someone else is going to be tracking it, so maybe it won't be her kiosk, but wherever she got the coconuts will have something that's tracked in a more ledger-friendly manner.
So Holly, then, how do we get to a point where large-scale investors see the opportunity to move money in developing economies as an investment opportunity for them?
Well, first of all, I'd turn around a little bit in terms of creating something and not having to have people think it's an investment opportunity, just making it such. Look at how the equity market started. You basically had a company that said, I want to collect some money, I want to build something, I want R&D, and so we as investors or just people who are trying to have savings accounts to make money would give them some money and they would create a business. So if we can look at how we can replicate that. So how can we replicate that in the woman who has a little shop? What does she need to have invested? Do we need to buy her inventory? Those are the puzzle pieces that I charge everyone with thinking about of what is needed? How do we replicate that? Do we need to build her a bigger building? What do these businesses need as investments? Once we can figure out what they need as investments, how does that then translate into potentially more revenue or an increased flow of resources, and how can we pull off pennies off that to pay the investor back? And that's really the model across the board. Again, it needs to be in scale. Maybe you take many, many, many people who have small shacks and you create something where you're giving them a package of something. It's like the Generation Project is a philanthropic project. It was most in Bangladesh. It's all over, where they give the very indigent people who are making nothing, a woman with 6 children, and they give her a basket of assets, a goat, a cow, a chicken, and their money is given away. So this is not an investment vehicle, but we talk about how we turn this into investment. Then that woman now has a way to create economy and to create flow of resources, and it's been proven, and London School of Economics has data on this program for years and years. It's been proven that they become economically viable in 2 to 3 years. I mean, it's amazing by giving these assets. Well, that is a perfect formula for creating investments out of this. How do you give assets and then turn it into a little bit more flow of resources, and then therefore pay back the people who've given the money, as opposed to uncounting it being philanthropic? It's
a little bit the Kiva model, but without Kiva still being a nonprofit, Kiva not necessarily making a profit.
So, do we actually need to bring the internet into the village? Or can we do this with SMS? And I'm really serious, because although we can all believe in our heart of hearts that the internet is the most powerful tool for enriching and empowering and blah, 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 if it isn't, we should go do something else. I'm serious.
And what does the internet bring? I mean, obviously it brings education, it brings information. Is that important to personal sovereignty and the betterment of the human race?
Up until the election, I would have thought of that as a rhetorical question. Not everybody believes that, apparently, even in Washington, D.C. So off topic, how do we go from the belief then that putting the internet into, here's a community, right, and let it be in rural Uganda, or it could be in Myanmar, or it could be in Pakistan, and it goes from being a dusty place with nothing to, ta-da, the internet, and they can use blockchain for transactions and so on and so on. In what ways can we make that investment worthwhile, so that the governments of Pakistan or Myanmar or Uganda say, yeah, it's the ROI writ large is positive? And that was not a rhetorical question. That's an actual question.
They need to see a benefit, so they'll be motivated if there's a benefit, and part of it would be the return on investment, but there's going to be other benefits as well. So there's going to be the benefit of improved health, improved economic productivity. There's going to be the benefit of improved education, and connectivity. We're talking about connectivity is also tied into electricity and infrastructure and water and all these other resources that people need before they can even have internet in there.
So, Katerina, does that express then that the ledger by which we should actually create a ledger in which we're not only measuring how many cigarettes and bottles of Coca-Cola the woman is selling in the kiosk, but create a ledger of how the village is doing?
I think these already exist. I think these are already measured. The general health of populations are measured.
In a lot of, let's say the small villages in Indonesia, no, nothing's measured. They don't even know they can't even prove they own the land, right?
I mean, I think one of the biggest things is, what problem are we trying to solve? You know, what are we trying to accomplish? Are we trying to accomplish that all human beings thrive on this planet?
Yes.
I mean, okay, so if that really is the end goal of having people thrive, then we want to unpack what are those elements that allow human beings to thrive, and then we figure out how we start doing that. And then if we can get them all to thrive with all these different bullet points we're bringing them, and everyone's on board with that, all the governments want to see that happen, the powers that be are excited about that, then we get into what we talked about earlier, was a formal economy where it's taxable. So we talked about how an informal economy, the governments aren't able to extract any kind of revenue from that, so they can provide services. So the internet, and you start formalizing it. But this is also a massive assumption that everyone's got great value systems, and that everyone has other human beings' best interest in mind. And I think we want to make sure everything we do is always trying to be predicated. If we can predicate everything on that, we're going to go a lot further. So many things that happen on this planet are not predicated on human beings' best interest.
The commonwealth, literally, right. Okay, small audience, but you've got questions. So rather than just me droning on and on, anybody wish to ask our excellent panelists great questions? Otherwise, I can keep going. How do we use internet data? Can we use internet data to not only achieve something more like a commonwealth, but also to actually make it such that investors think this is a good place to go?
You're asking me that.
Hello, Holly.
Just waiting for questions. You know, I still struggle with that question of how do we have investors think it's a good place to come. I want to turn that on its head. That's not the way that I look at the world anymore. It's more about, how do I create sustainability for you and for you and for you and for you? How do I make sure that everyone in this room has some sort of flow of resources that they can retire on, that they know that they can pay for their food when they get older and they're not working? How do I make sure that everyone on the planet, the bottom of the pyramid and the top, not the 1% that has lots and lots of savings, but the amount of people on this planet who have so many savings that they absolutely do not worry at all about their well-being till they die is so small. Right. So it's so much more about creating products that are connecting the thriving and the human beings in the bottom of the pyramid to the sustainability of regular humans in the modern world also. Not having to go and convince investors that it matters, is making that connection. It's very much of it's really tearing the page out. Yeah. And
yes, Mele.
I just have to say, I'm from Singapore, and we just decided that $500 per capita GDP was not sufficient 50 years ago. And we just said, no, we can do better than this. And sometimes it's about just having intention. And I think for us to sit here as one of the global elite and say, well, what do they want? They want a life just like us. And so I just had to speak up, because it's about giving them agency and having them realize they can make a difference. And that's how I grew up.
Question, yeah.
Oh, hi.
No.
Hey, so the question is about rethinking, reimagining the cooperative now in the digital world. I'd love your perspectives on what's happening here with blockchain. You've got this emergence of DAOs that we talked about, decentralized autonomous organizations, basically digital organizations. I'd love your thoughts on trends happening here, maybe around universal basic income as well, because it does seem like a form to be able to enable that. Any thoughts? Welcome.
I have thoughts. So decentralized autonomous organizations, to clarify to people, is it's an organization that sort of has its own bylaws, contracts written out in advance, and people can be anywhere all over the world and sort of plug into this. And it's a different governance structure, and it's built upon blockchains. And I don't know if we didn't really do a basic explanation of blockchains, but imagine something that is worldwide, thousands of people anywhere can plug into it, and it's not controlled by a government or a corporation or a bank. And then this idea of universal basic income is pretty interesting, and there's quite a few governments and countries and even cities experimenting with it right now, recognizing that the cost of having a population that doesn't have savings and can't support itself as it gets older or as it gets unhealthy is actually much higher than if everyone just received a small basic income on a regular basis to cover their food and their housing. And then would that make people more productive? Would it create more artists? Would people be able to follow their passions? You know, how would that affect other aspects of their lives? And I think these are very interesting questions. And platforms and infrastructures like blockchain allow for these kinds of experiments to scale much bigger.
And that's just such a perfect word to talk about what we need to do in investing. Is that we don't, that was such a perfect segue to what you keep saying about getting the investors, getting the pension funds to buy in. We don't need to have buy-in. We need to create decentralized autonomous organizations and investment vehicles. And as long as we scale it and we have the capacity through the internet or somehow to get to the people and through these ledgers, not, you know, even just in the modern world, there's going to be demand because it's creating their own sustainability. So that's actually completely, thank you for those words. I know you've told me that before, but it just clicked in for me. That's really key to the investment world and scaling this, is looking at it as totally autonomous from the current system while using the pipes that exist there or using the models that they did use. Because it worked. Capital markets works. It's just creating something autonomous now with a different value system, and then we can totally do this.
And to come back also, you'd mentioned cooperatives. So the ethos around cooperatives is that everyone is working together, contributing to this organization or company to make it stronger. And they all have a buy-in, they all have an ownership of this company. And so their motivation to work at this company is really different than this extractive version of capitalism, which is you work and we take a whole lot of your product, of your, you know, contribution, whereas in cooperatives, everyone actually owns a part of it and benefits when the entire system does well.
Keep going.
Well, if we think about the origins of blockchains and of Bitcoin was this peer-to-peer idea, was that we recognize that there's been this very extractive system, especially around finance, and can we create, and Satoshi Nakamoto created this system that was completely peer-to-peer and decentralized and didn't have a single point that was taking more than others. Now, you know, the way it has evolved, like I said, it's sort of an experiment, but it's very much along the same lines of a cooperative. We all are part of the system because we believe in the system, and our individual success is the greater success. By the people, for the people.
Any questions out there? Yes, actually we've got like 5. So.
I'm just kind of curious if we've actually developed a list of areas such as you mentioned education, which has a deferred cost to it, but a recognized return on investment. And I was reading an article earlier this week about artwork coming out of Africa, and the assessment was that it's highly undervalued, and the Chinese are buying it up by the truckloads. So are there other areas besides education and artwork, including music, I guess was touched upon earlier, where even poor communities actually generate something of value that may have a deferred return later? Do we have a list of those areas or categories of those areas?
I'd love to know about such a list. I actually stuck on a very long flight about a year ago, was thinking about what would happen to, what would one would do if one knew that 1 billion people were going to be out of work. And we sort of do know that 1 billion people are going to be out of work. And in fact, one of them was in fact to rebuild the culture that we've sort of done a good job of destroying in most parts of the world. So art and music, but actually more deeply beyond that, to make it as it is in a few places. Bali in Indonesia is one, some African countries. It is everybody's job to maintain the culture. But there are others that can actually employ up to 1 billion people as well. But,
and that comes to a efficient flow of resources. And also, you had a question. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I'm trying to get. Can you come down and I'll give you the mic? No, keep talking while she comes down.
I wanted to just mention, I'm not sure if you heard earlier, but I think that people's health information is actually very useful for improved research. I think that there's been a dearth of representation of all different kinds of communities and ethnicities and body types in certain kinds of research. And so I think that even the poorest communities have something to contribute just by their very existence. I think it's pretty simple.
Actually, my question was regarding that when you were mentioning universal basic income, which is there's been a discussion somewhere where, you know, all this big data is generating lots of marketing, health, and all this value for a lot of companies, but the individuals who are generating this data is not being compensated in any way. And so I heard a discussion where maybe the individuals who are contributing to this valuable data that is very key to, you know, flourishing, I guess, to borrow a term from an earlier speaker, but the individuals themselves are not being compensated. So maybe universal income should be given or compensated to individuals who are generating this data that allows these companies to make a lot of money.
There's several blockchain companies that are looking at medical data and how to tap that and how to keep it connected to the individual while protecting their anonymity or their privacy along the way as well. And it's challenging. I don't know exactly how it is in other countries, but I know in the U.S., medical record keeping is a big issue in hospitals.
Or even beyond medical, there's like all the marketing data. Like any free app that you download, it's probably collecting some data that is being used somewhere in media marketing. And it's all being crunched by analytics that tells people what you're going to buy tomorrow. And a lot of money is being made for that. So if there's any movement there to recompense the individuals, that'd be great.
Absolutely. I think people don't even realize how much of their personal information they're giving away. And that's becoming eye-opening. Cambridge Analytica, not to delve into politics, but that was one sort of, you know, quick example without realizing. But coming back to owning your own data, I think that's something that blockchains are looking at, and attaching identity somehow in an infrastructure that you can still have a connection to your personal identity, but then various bits of that information can be used in different ways. That still comes back down to you're getting paid for it in small micro amounts. And there are companies looking at that right now.
Please join me in thanking Holly and Katarina. Thanks very much.